Great. Thank you all so much for being here. I am Jacqueline Felcher, the managing editor of Payload. Hopefully most of you in this room are familiar with us, but just a quick background, we're a media startup covering the business and policy of space, and we publish a daily newsletter at 9 a.m. In addition to a couple weekly offerings, including a weekly space policy newsletter that covers national security and policy here in DC. I am so excited for this panel today. We have a star lineup of guests from DoD to industry to Capitol Hill. Joining me are General Michael Gutlein, the Space Force's Vice Chief of Space Operations, Senator Mark Kelly, a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee that oversees national security space, Christopher Scalise, the Director of the National Reconnaissance Office, and Joe Laurenti, the founder and CEO of Ursa Major. So thank you, gentlemen, all so much for being here today. Dr. Scalise, I'd like to start with you, delving a little bit into the report card that was released by the Reagan Institute this week, which has a couple markers that should relate to innovation more broadly, but we're here talking about the space domain. One is the Defense Modernization Score, which received a score of D, obviously not anyone's goal. Do you think that grade accurately represents the space-specific field as well, and how is the NRO trying to address that?
Well, I think in space we're innovating. In fact, tomorrow we have a launch out of Wallops Flight Facility where we're going to be launching some payloads to go off and demonstrate some advanced capabilities. And that's one of the things that we have to do in the space environment, is in order to stay ahead of not only threats but to reflect the change in the space environment. There's a lot of new companies coming along that are bringing a lot of new capabilities. There's a lot of new technologies that are coming along, and we need to stay ahead. So I would say on the space side, we're constantly innovating. We're making a lot of progress. There's still a lot to do because it's a very challenging environment, both the environment itself and the challenges that we have to do in order to stay ahead of our competitors out in the world.
General Gutlein, I'd like to come to you next. The military has talked about going to the commercial sector to going to them with problems to be solved, not necessarily going to them asking for specific solutions to allow the industrial base to innovate. So what are some of the problems that you can talk about where the military is looking to the commercial sector to innovate?
So I'll give you it from a space perspective, because I would say space is a little bit different right now. We're different because we are experiencing a significant increase in the threat. The increase in the threat is requiring us to think about the way we get after the threat in new and innovative ways. The threat is also coming in the near term, not in the far term. So that means I don't have time to go off and build a lot of new capability. If you look at the DoD way of the past, was, hey, we needed to build the capability and own the capability to make sure that we could have the capability there during times of crisis or conflict. That's all changing. I can't build enough capability fast enough to get after the near-term threats. So that means we're going to have to rely on partnerships with allies and partnerships with commercial. So from a space perspective, what we're really looking at and pursuing now is what we call hybrid architectures, which is an integrated and networked architecture of both DoD organic as well as commercial and as well as allied assets. And as we do that, we're able to reach into industry and take advantage of their innovation, which we're seeing now for the first time in a long time since the push to the moon, a significant increase in the capabilities and the innovation coming out of industry, which gives us a leverage to get after our competitive advantage of our partnerships.
So you talked about the threat that the U.S. is facing in space. Senator Kelly, I'm hoping you can provide a bit of an overview about how adversaries are approaching space, especially Russia and China, and why it's so critical for the U.S. to innovate to keep pace.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jacqueline. And morning, everybody. Great to be here. I've been on the Armed Services Committee since I showed up in the Senate in 2020. But more recently, I've been assigned to the Intelligence Committee as well since the passing of Senator Feinstein. I took her spot on Intel. And when you're on the Intel Committee, you have a more detailed and in-depth view of threats that's out there. And the space stuff kind of surprised me, to be honest. Just the proliferation of our adversaries' capabilities, in not only LEO, but MEO, GEO, the kind of capabilities they have and what we have to do to counter those. It's clear to me, and I think it's probably to most other folks that pay attention to this, that the next big conflict between near-peer adversaries to us is going to be fought to some extent with kinetic action in space. That's a real possibility. Not what we want. We've got certain agreements between countries to try to mitigate against these issues, which are rather significant. I mean, you start battling it out in Earth orbit, it's going to have a big impact on commercial space as well. So, my role on these two committees is to make sure that our adversaries, understand that this is not a road they should go down. And my goal is to make sure that we are more capable than they are. And so far, I think we've been successful. But like any, in preparing for any future conflict, you've got to be trying to think ahead of your adversaries and figure out where we need to be 10 and 20 years from now. We're doing that now.
Just to follow up on that, the fact that you as a sitting senator and a member of the Armed Services Committee were surprised by what you learned on the Intel Committee, is there, what do you say to your colleagues, or what can you say to the public or to industry to make sure that they know this if you in your position were surprised by what you learned on the new committee assignment?
Yeah, I'd say it's where we've come since I was on the other end of this business, flying the space shuttle, to where we are today is a really positive thing. To have this level of competition and to have multiple providers, helps the Space Force, helps the NRO, helps industry, helps our economy. So we've progressed in the right direction from where we were, as the general mentioned, when it was a DoD capability. And DoD wanted to retain this, but now that's no longer practical. I think we're in a much better spot.
So, Joe, moving to you and turning back to the report card, one of the recommendations made urges both Congress and the DoD to prioritize the development and maturation of novel manufacturing processes for munitions and military capabilities. Obviously, something that you are approaching at Ursa Major. So, how do you look at that, and what, from your viewpoint in industry, can Congress and the DoD here do to better support private companies?
That was a great recommendation in the report card. I think tying to something General Gutlein said, that this isn't the DoD of old. This is, we're entering, especially within space, an era in which we need to iterate, innovate very rapidly. And we are seeing private industry pick up the torch there. Without advanced manufacturing, that might not be cost affordable. So I will flag one of the things that has really impressed me just in recent months. The most recent SpaceX transporter rideshare launch had 3 novel startups launch their first satellites in True Anomaly, Atomos, and Apex, I believe was the last one. And I think all 3 of those companies are likely using novel advanced manufacturing like 3D printing, advanced metallurgy, and likely developing even low-cost sensors, low-cost satellite buses in ways that certainly startups weren't doing 10, 15 years ago. So embracing, really investing in novel manufacturing is not just going to help efforts in space, but like the suggestion reports, munitions as well.
And is there anything that Congress and DoD can do in terms of policy or legislation or authorities that you think would make it easier for industry in this realm?
There's a lot there. I think it's difficult to point NRE funding, non-recurring engineering funding, toward something as broad as advanced manufacturing. But certainly when it comes to requirements, Department of Defense requirements, intelligence community requirements for manufacturing qualification, there's a lot to be learned still. So I think it starts with just embracing novel mission sets, embracing new ways of communicating with companies like ours, and really being willing to take risk where acceptable. In space, risk is really not very acceptable. So further upstream on the benchtop in the lab, that's the area to do so.
So another marker on the scorecard is about the talent base, and obviously innovation is really driven by people. So Dr. Scalise, how are you approaching the need to recruit and retain an innovative workforce at the NRO, especially when you look at competition with the commercial sector? The talent-based portion of the scorecard received a D. So how are you trying to improve that within the NRO?
So, as you know, the NRO is composed really of three workforces, and one of those is we call cadre, and that's the one that we actually do the recruiting in. It's relatively new, and we've found that we're relatively successful in bringing in people to the NRO who want to go on and work on some of the things that we do. When we explain what it is we do, we're operating in space. That's an exciting field to be in. And we're working in a lot of advanced technologies. We start off really by going out to universities and talking to students, bringing them in as interns, and giving them an opportunity to actually work on projects and see what we do intimately and get involved with it. In some cases, they actually go off and make things. So they get to see, firsthand what it is, and we find that attracts a lot of people to come in, and we have a pretty good record of retaining interns and bringing them in. And then, of course, we also recruit at more senior levels. In that case, it's a much more experienced workforce that knows what's going on. So we're finding that we're actually pretty good at recruiting. It doesn't mean that there aren't challenges. There certainly are challenges in certain fields, and that's where we partner with industry to go off and fill those gaps. Information technology, IT, for instance, is an area, networking, where it's very difficult to compete with industry. But on the other hand, we can work with industry to go off and get some capabilities. And it's been mentioned earlier, there's a lot coming out in the commercial sector. So we view it more as a partnership. There's a lot of innovation going on there, and we want to take advantage of that as well. And we work that by going all the way from, as was talked before, very early stage developments where we're willing to take a lot of risk, and the companies are willing to say, hey, I want to know what the NRO is. They may decide that they want to work with us. They may decide that they don't. Usually they do. And then we can progress all the way on up into, actual critical systems that we're going to go off and rely on. And that's everything from components to satellites.
General Gutlein, I don't know if you'd like to weigh in here as well. I know early on in the Space Force's history, leaders said, we have no trouble recruiting, everyone wants to come work for the Space Force. Is that still the case? And are there any kind of talent gaps you have that you're trying to fill?
No, luckily that is still the case. We have more applicants than we are able to assess into the Space Force, which is a good problem to have. It allows us to be very picky in who we're picking. We are valuing technical backgrounds because it is a very technical career field, a very technical domain. But in addition to that, we're also leveraging a whole lot of other tools that Congress allowed us to use. One is direct commission. I can bring in expertise as a colonel in the United States Space Force, having never had any expertise, any military background. Highly qualified experts. We hire a lot of highly qualified experts straight out of industry into the government for 3 to 5 years. For example, Dr. Claire Leone, who is now running the Space Systems Integration Office out in Los Angeles, she came out of industry and out of academia, come back into the government. Our congressional affairs we hired out of industry. So we're able to reach into all those organizations. But going back to what Dr. Scalise said, that 1/3 of his population is also guardians and airmen. And we are intentionally growing those individuals into the NRO, collaborating with the NRO to get that expertise and then bringing it back into the Space Force. So we've been very good at both the recruiting, the retention, and then getting access to various technical backgrounds through those programs.
So, Senator Kelly, I'd like to come to you next. You obviously referenced your time at NASA. You were there during a pretty transformative time for the agency where they began relying on commercial providers for some of the most important missions, including launching people. So can you talk a little bit about sort of that experience at an agency that was beginning to rely more on commercial providers, and anything you saw that maybe could be lessons learned to incorporate in the national security sector?
Yeah, when I arrived at NASA, it was 1996. We were sort of in the middle of the space shuttle program. Flew my first mission in 2001. Shortly thereafter, we had the Columbia accident. I was on the second return to flight mission. And then, flew again in 2008 as the commander of Discovery and then commander of the final flight of Endeavour. Towards my later two flights is when we started talking about this, commercial cargo, commercial crew. And so I got to see sort of up close the beginning of SpaceX and them trying to, orbit a spacecraft for the first time. To be honest, I didn't think it was gonna be possible. It was always countries that did this, not like small private companies. It seemed like a really hard thing to do, because it is. I mean, space stuff is hard. I mean, you're trying to get, machinery moving at the limits of its capability at a very high rate of speed, unforgiving environment when you get there. It's really, really challenging. So I was a bit of a skeptic. And when we decided to, it was during the Obama administration, decided to throw all this money over the fence to these commercial providers, I didn't think they were going to be successful. I mean, I've been proved wrong. I mean, this has been a great move by our country to do this, to get away from where the government owned all the capability. The government built the rockets, or, we had contractors, but we owned the system. It's turned out to be a better approach to allow companies like SpaceX and others to innovate, to try to stay out of their way, to allow them to be the best innovators they can be, and then when necessary, we get in there, we make adjustments along the way. It's reduced the cost to LEO and beyond by, probably nearly, compared to the space shuttle, probably an order of magnitude. So this has been a real benefit for us, and I'm really glad it worked out. And it just puts us in a good position here for the future. We always got to be looking at how do we make adjustments, and the general here and NRO and NASA is paving the way, and we want to be helpful in Congress. I know we're not always helpful. Congress can often get in the way of things, but we're trying to do a better job.
So, Dr. Scalise, I want to bring you in here since you also obviously worked at NASA before coming to the NRO. As Senator Kelly talks about, SpaceX and some of these now major commercial space companies grew out of early investments and early buy-in from NASA. So are national security agencies doing enough to invest in and help grow this, next generation of national security-focused commercial providers?
I would say we're doing well. We can always do better, and we work. Our systems rely much more on commercial than they did before. An example that many people know is we're buying commercial imagery. Now it is integrated into the national architecture so that we can make that available just like we can do national technical means. That really allows us to do a lot more. We can focus the exquisite systems on the things that you need an exquisite system for, and we can utilize the commercial systems to address many of the other issues that we have to go off and deal with. So that's one example. I think the other example that we've had, and you mentioned NASA, they started relying on commercial satellites quite some time ago. Our weather satellites, for instance, are based on commercial buses. We're now looking to do the same thing as we're seeing commercial satellites become much more available and literally becoming a commodity. That offers us a lot of flexibility. So now we can go off and use those capabilities in ways that we'd never thought of in the past. So I think it's still relatively new, but I think it's going in a very, very positive direction. Is there more we can do? Yes, but I think that actually I'll let General Gutlein comment as well. But I think between Space Force and NRO, we're doing a lot to really advance the utility of commercial.
Yeah, General, would love to get you to weigh in here as well, and in terms of Space Force investments.
I would say the first advice I'd give everybody, if you've been out of this business for more than 12 months, your knowledge is dated. That's how fast our industry is changing. The way we are partnering today with our commercial partner, with industry partners, is completely different than we did 2 to 3 years ago. We are arm in arm going forward. And what do I mean by that? First of all, within the Space Force, we have the Commercial Space Office. Their job is to build those partnerships. One way they're doing that is what we call reverse industry days, or through the front door. The front door is your one-stop shop. If you're a small business and you don't know how to do business with the federal government, and I will tell you it's extremely complex, come to the front door. We will show you how to come through there. We'll show you how to do business with the federal government. We'll talk to you about SIBRs and STTRs and TAC FIs and Strat FIs and all those. You know, it is a very complex business. So we are first and foremost trying to make it easy for you to come through the front door and then mentor you when you do come through that front door. But then we have these things we call reverse industry days. In the days of the old, we would not tell you what our thoughts were until we put a proposal out on an RFP out on the street, and then you'd have to read between the lines to understand where we're thinking and what we want. Today we're having reverse industry days where I will tell you a problem. I need a mesh network in space across all orbital regimes to guarantee space communications. And this is how we're thinking about doing that. You industry partner, what can you bring to the table in a very transparent, open dialogue that we're having going forward? That is paying a lot of dividends. The second thing that we're doing, that we're going to release the commercial strategy here within the next month. In that commercial strategy, we're going to talk about the commercially augmented space reserve. That is all about building the partnerships during peacetime with our industry partners that we've never done before, so that we can share data, talk about ideas, et cetera, so that I can guarantee your capability will be there during times of crisis or conflict. Those are transparent conversations that we need to have that we haven't been having in the past. So we are trying to go across the entire spectrum of discussions and organizations and processes to embrace as much of the commercial partnership as we can.
So, Joe, I'd like to bring you in here. Obviously, we've heard what the military is doing, but would love to get your perspective in industry. Obviously, you know, harnessing innovation and going faster are things that have been talked about in the military for a long time. From kind of the side of business, has progress been made? Do you know about these, you know, options that are available to you, and are they helpful?
Absolutely. I'll actually flag what the senator said, that 15 years ago, SpaceX was awarded their commercial cargo contract. I was at SpaceX at the time. I also was not a believer in it, but it obviously worked out very well. And we've moved from private space endeavors just seeking to create access to space, in the case of SpaceX, to some of these on-orbit capabilities, proximity maneuvering, development of sensors, in our case, development of propulsion systems that probably would not have had a demand signal from DoD or the intelligence community even 12 months ago, maybe, in the case the general said. So I think we're absolutely seeing change, and if we are going to shortcut that innovation cycle between industry and government, it's going to be very multi-pronged. We're going to need that 10-year signal of the direction technology and the mission is headed. We're going to need rapid signals in the case of a one-year change to adversarial capabilities, and we're going to need reserve capabilities in which industry can quickly fill needs that industry might not have planned on or that we didn't seek to develop.
Well, great. So I was at Satellite this week, yesterday, as I'm sure some of you were in this room as well. There's a lot of space going on this week, and I heard overwhelmingly positive things from industry, especially about SDA. That they are really setting the gold standard for working with industry. But generally, I'd like you to talk here a little bit about ways, whether sort of that innovative spirit of the DIU or the SDA, how and whether that is kind of translating over into the broader force. Are there pockets of that in these offices that industry has had a lot of success with, or do you think it's really starting to be service-wide? I
think it's starting to be service-wide across the Space Force. We are starting to incorporate it in every aspect of our mission. So if you go back to what Space Development Agency's been able to do, they've proven from concept to launch in 24 months. So they were able to say, hey, we're going to build this tranche of satellites and we're going to launch it 2 years from now, and they absolutely did it. There's 20-some satellites up there today, and they're headed into the hundreds here pretty soon. Their method of business was take something commercially off the shelf, don't modify it, get it up there as fast as you possibly can, and then iterate off that design in multiple tranches. That's kind of the way we're looking at going forward, is I don't always have to have the most exquisite solution possible, but sometimes it might be the 70% solution. If you look at what we're doing under tactically responsive space, tactically responsive space is about providing effects to the combatant commander on tactically relevant timelines. What does that mean? 24 hours-ish. Combatant commander doesn't have time to wait years for a new capability to come down line. What we just did under Victus Nox is that we proved that we can go into a open production line on a satellite manufacturer, take their bus off the production line, take a sensor off a production line, integrate those together, take a rocket off a production line, and then within 24 hours of the word go, they can integrate those, encapsulate those, launch those, and have those in operations. We did that within 27 hours. The objective was 24 hours. Why did we need 3 additional hours? Because we were waiting on the Earth's rotation to come around to the point where we wanted to launch. That's the only thing that slowed us down. That is going to be the way of the future, is taking advantage of the commercial products in their current form, integrating them together to get us capability against the fight that we don't currently have tonight.
So, Joe, I want to come back to you about, what you obviously have a room full of officials, a panel full of officials. What is your, greatest ask from industry? What does industry need to really have a strong supply chain, a thriving industrial base? What would your wish list look like?
I mean, it takes a lot of backbone for not just companies like us, but the private investors that back us to say we see the need here, we see the value in the mission that we're providing for, and we're going to continue to back that. It's very attractive to say we're going to go put together a scrappy team in a garage and build the next app of the future, but I think sensors and propulsion systems and munitions and satellites are much more important for the next 10 years of this country. And as long as we have buy-in there, we're going to see industry and the investment base behind it partner in really novel ways going forward.
And I want to build off that, because it really comes down to the conversations.
Absolutely.
In order for you to understand where we're going, we have to have a transparent conversation. So I have to have that conversation with the developer, but I also have to have the conversation with the venture capitalist, so that they can understand what that future demand signal might look like, so that they know if they're going to take a bet, there's a chance that bet's going to win.
And so are you meeting with, directly talking with people in the VC and funding communities now?
We are sharing notes back and forth. We're going to some of the same conferences. The majority of that effort's right now happening under the Commercial Space Office, under Colonel Rich Knisely and the front door conversations. We are inviting the venture capitalists to all of our reverse industry days, so that they can understand where our thoughts are and have that dialogue with us. We've even got relationships where if they see something promising out in industry, they're tipping us. And if we see something out in industry, we're tipping them as well.
That's interesting. I mean, I obviously knew that the military was trying to work more with commercial providers, but I didn't realize it was kind of tipping over to the fundraising community too, which is obviously crucial to the success of commercial providers. Dr. Scalise, is there, can you weigh in from the NRO perspective here on that?
Certainly, yeah, it's very much the same thing. I mean, we were different. 30 years ago, we were a secret, roughly, right? There was, somebody in a dark suit would come into a room and say, "Hey, you want to talk?" but never say where they were from. That's not the case anymore, and we are out there. We are involved in trade shows. We're at conferences, and yes, I mean we are reaching out much more broadly than we have before, and with a number of different ways. We have a Directors Innovation Initiative where we reach out to universities and industry at all levels to bring them in with their ideas. Not our ideas, they're their ideas. We've gone off, as General Gutlein said, very similarly, and said, hey, these are the problems we're trying to solve. And companies can come in, we can provide some degree of funding, some degree of direction as to what we meant by it. And then we try and find a ride to get it done, to go off and demonstrate that we can actually do that in space and deliver that product. And what it's done is it's built relationships between academia and I'll say non-traditional industry just because it's not who you'd expect us to go to, and built those relationships. And it has allowed us to go from development times of 5 or 10 years to 2 or 3 years to go from concept to delivery on orbit. And that's making all the difference in the world.
And I think the collaboration has been huge, because when we do our reverse industry days, Chris's team is right there with us.
Yes.
So they're communicating back and forth what the IC demand signal is going to look like as well. But then when we're looking at what the future contracts might look like for commercial, NRO's leading the way in their GEOINT contract is ELCL. So we're using that currently as our model of a way to get after having capacity during times of crisis or conflict. So you're starting to see, or not starting to see, I guess it's been for 3 or 4 years now, a very strong collaboration between Title 50 and Title 10 with the Space Force and the NRO. And
I think it's worth adding, too, that this partnership is broader than just commercial industry. It's also, I mentioned academia, but it's also our international partners. Yeah. We have a lot of relationships with our international partners now that we didn't have before, where we can share information and share technologies.
I think it's important to mention that that partnership also includes folks in Congress.
Absolutely.
It's really important for all of you guys in this room. If you do this already, if you get up to Capitol Hill and explain, your company, your industry to members of Congress, the amount of stuff that comes through our office every week can be a little bit overwhelming. So meeting somebody in person, having them explain this, and then come back 6 months later, it really helps members of the House and Senate understand, why do we do this? Why do we appropriate this money? And it helps us draft whatever next piece of legislation is going to be. Right now we've seen this CHIPS and Science Act. The president was in Arizona this week, $8.5 billion grant to Intel to build these fabrication facilities. I mean, a piece of legislation that size, $52 billion, only happens because it was a collaboration between, members and DoD and industry. So I encourage you to keep doing that.
I do want to backtrack just a little bit to this idea of the demand signal that's coming, from obviously the Space Force and the NRO, but Congress is also a part of this, its ability to pass a budget, to pass authorization bills. Senator Kelly, it's obviously been a struggle on Capitol Hill, but what can you say about, maybe in these meetings, ways that Congress can telegraph that demand signal even in today's legislative environment?
Well, you say a struggle, I think, is an understatement. After I'd been in the Senate for about, 6 months, I, realized that if NASA had the rules of the United States Senate, the rocket ship would never leave the launch pad. It just wouldn't. It is a challenging organization. We're trying to, improve things, all the time. On the demand signal side, I often think that's that generally comes more from DoD and NRO and the agencies, but we're often, especially on armed services and intel, you're seeing national security problems out there, maybe sometimes before other people realize it. And when we see that, we try to filter that down to DoD and the intelligence, back through the intelligence community on how do we get to a solution, and then that gets to industry.
We have just about a minute left, but willing to take like one or two, maybe one question from the audience. Courtney, if you want to.
Do I need to wait for the mic? Or?
Yes, he's coming your way with a mic.
Courtney Alvin with Defense News. Dr. Scalise, I wanted to ask about the space-based GMTI program that you're working on with the Space Force. About a year ago at this time, you talked about plans to launch some demonstration satellites. I wondered if you can, update us on that. Have you launched those, and what are you learning there? And then also, what are you doing to reduce risk on that effort and move quickly to field that capability?
So short answer is we have launched them, and they've been up there for a number of years. We work very closely with the Space Force on that. They have informed what we're doing, and we're ready to go now with launches to start making more progress and getting it operational. So it's been it's been a very, very tight relationship. Yes, the prototypes went up there. They were delivered in about 36 months from concept to launch. Operated fine, and we have exercised with Space Force and the other services to prove their capability, and then we're able to move on to production.
Well, we are unfortunately out of time. I know I was saying earlier I could have gone 35 minutes one-on-one with any of these very impressive guests. So thank you so much to our speakers for being here. Thank you to our audience.